Wow, we have greetings from Guatemala, Smriti. Amazing. Amazing. Let's give us a couple more minutes and let folks sign in, and we'll get started. Wow, a true international event. This is exciting. I feel like we should post a map of the world and just put a pin on every call out that we get on geography. Kind of a fun way to populate the image.
That'd be fun.
It would be. Smriti, should we start or should we give it a couple more minutes? What do you think?
Should we give it another minute?
All right. A hard 60 seconds.
So I took this photograph of my mother in her front yard in Virginia on her farm. And my mother really hated being photographed. So I really had to plead with her for several days. Please, let's do your hair and do some official photographs. And so she's like, I don't really want to, but okay. So anyway, I got about 3 or 4 good photographs and then she lost interest. So I was very excited because, I knew she needed the photographs. And so her flowers were blooming and I really was pleading with her for days. And so finally I got her out there and I was telling her jokes to make her smile because she didn't like artificially smiling. So most of my photographs of my mother that are the official promotion photographs were all taken in a 15-minute period in one day, and that was it. So,
this is a gorgeous photograph, Ken.
Thank you. Yeah, I got her on a good day and I was kind of zinging her and telling her jokes and things.
So you want to start us off with one of those jokes, Ken?
Well, this kind of thing is between my mother and I that I could really poke her and get her, to smile and say just ridiculous things.
This could be your breakthrough stand-up moment, Ken.
Exactly. I think I'll stick to my photography. It's a safe place for me, behind the camera.
Outstanding. Well, there may be time at the end. Let's get started. Okay. Welcome everybody to this very special session curated by the good folks at Pallium India. And a thank you to Project Echo for providing the platform. My name is Manish Mishra, and I'm a psychiatrist and a faculty member at Dartmouth Medical School in the US. And my practice is primarily psychological therapy with young patients who struggle with addiction and geriatric patients who struggle with meaning. And despite the assumed age differences, I hear their questions to be very similar, as both groups are meditating on death. And I imagine that's why I was invited to host the session today, as there's considerable crossover between my work and that of the woman we're celebrating. So 16 years ago today marks the day that Elisabeth Kübler-Ross passed away. I think we're all familiar with her work, as she was not only able to go into the deeper corners of psychic landscape, but she was able to gift that to those who could not. She gifted us a method. Her 5 stages of grief was popularized in the late 60s. And it's astounding to think that something that she created has brought comfort to millions across the world in moments of loss. So before I went to medical school, I studied Sanskrit and linguistics as a graduate student. And so when I was preparing this session, I did my due diligence on a term that's at the heart of palliative care. The term is grief. And as it turns out, grief can be traced back to pre-Sanskrit roots. In fact, grief is a derivative of a Proto-Indo-European language, Grehus. In Sanskrit, you get guru. Latin, you get gravis, like gravity, which eventually becomes grief in modern English. Now these roots, Grehu, Guru, Gravis, are different iterations that all come to mean heavy. So the question is, what's the connection between the Guru in Sanskrit translating into heavy? My sense is that grief is the teacher. Grief is the teacher. That's the message from the ancients codified in language over time. Grief is not the enemy we need to dispel with urgency. Grief is our teacher. We learn from the heaviness we carry, and today we're celebrating that connection. So for the next hour, let's celebrate those we've grieved for, those we've learned from. Let's challenge this tradition of avoiding talk about death and do the opposite. We're going to keep the deceased alive today by bringing joyful attention to who they were and telling people what they gave us. So we have 8 featured speakers today modeling how to keep those we've lost alive. Each speaker will introduce themselves, invoke the name of a loved one, describe their relationship, and share a memory. This is how we're going to conquer death today and keep our loved ones immortal. My ask is that as an audience, you simply listen to their stories. We all know that most health systems have problems. This isn't a time to think about correction and analyzing what went wrong, but simply receive the story as the speaker wants it to be heard. And with that, if we're able, I'd love to introduce, it's a distinct pleasure to introduce our first speaker, the son of the woman we honor today, Ken Ross.
Thank you very much, Manish, and thank you everyone at Pallium India. And my friends here, I see Joan Michael. I think our president from Brazil is on, Rodrigo. For me, of course, the last 15 years, I've been running a foundation for my mother. And so pretty much every day I'm talking about my mother, seeing videos of my mother. And, you know, it's just wonderful because for me, she's always still with me. Her presence, I hear stories every week that I've never heard in my life. It's just incredible how many stories one can hear about somebody and how many people my mother met. I mean, everywhere I go, I was at an airport in Croatia once, and I opened up my bag and I had my mother's book in my bag. And the person next to me said, "Oh, Elisabeth Kübler-Ross, I knew her." And I'm thinking, of course you did. I'm in Croatia. Why wouldn't you know my mother? You know, so everywhere I go, she's with me. And so for me, you know, I of course have some grief, but I was lucky enough to be my mother's caregiver for the last 9 years of her life. And so I had 9 years to say goodbye. Growing up as a child, both my parents were doctors. My father was a neuropathologist, and they would love to debate, you know, every concept around death you can imagine at the dinner table almost every single night. So I'm growing up hearing about death. My father is bringing home brains because he's a neuropathologist. So he's bringing home 1, 2, 3 human brains, leaving them in the kitchen where we're eating because that's where the garage door was. And so between that and my mother bringing home dying people who were my age, 10, 12, 14, I mean, every day I was exposed to death, and it really made an impression, as you can imagine. So at first I was kind of neurotic about it, but it began sinking in. I began thinking about life, and it was a wonderful gift they gave me. If you can imagine, growing up, my parents really didn't give me any rules. As long as I went to school and got decent grades and was a nice person, basically there was no rules. I could have monster parties. I could just tell my parents I wanted to go to Africa or Asia or wherever. They'd be like, great, you know, have a good time. And so I grew up in this wonderful kind of playland called life. And my mother would not really impose her beliefs on me, but she would just kind of politely, she was a psychiatrist and she really used that psychiatry on me. She just kind of gently exposed me to many ideas, many things. So when I was 9 years old, she started traveling and I'd go on trips with her because that was the only way I got to see her. And so I went to about 20 different countries with her. And if you can imagine, we're going to Eskimo villages and I'm meeting Eskimo healers. We're going to Africa, we're meeting shaman, witch doctors, the head Zulu witch doctor. And it was just, a wild childhood, which really made an impression upon me. And it was wonderful. She's just a great mom. She was a simple country doctor, right? So, I mean, she had this fame and all that, but that was one person. And then she was just my simple mom. We'd sit in the kitchen, we'd make candles, we'd do gardening. She loved to go blueberry picking, strawberry picking. So we just did like normal, like country things like that. She was definitely not a city person. And I just think with my mom, there's so many ironies because for the first 9 years, she took care of me and then she started traveling. And for the last 9 years of her life, I took care of her. And everyone in my family is a doctor except me. And I was the one who had to provide my mother's kind of medical care and decisions the last 9 years of her life. It's very ironic. On top of that, I became a photographer because I was very shy, very quiet. I didn't want to talk publicly like everyone else in my family. And through my mother and the foundation, that's what I've had to do. On top of that, I never read a single one of my mother's books until after she died. I don't know why, I just decided that. So it's very unusual. But, again, growing up was just an amazing experience. And my mother was so tuned into things. It was just shocking to see her operate on so many different levels. For example, if you can imagine, she was invited to go to India, her biggest dream of her life, and she never got there. She was invited by Indira Gandhi to meet on October 31st, 1984. Now, some of us may remember what happened that day. And my mother decided at the last minute not to go, and she didn't say why. And that was the day she was assassinated. So, just these incredible things. My mother just showed me what's possible as far as tuning into life, tuning into the world, and being really connected on so many levels that have, no rational explanation. So anyway, I look back at my mom's life and, as a mother, and, it's just been a wonderful experience. I really have no sadness. I think she just lived it to the fullest, and she taught me to live life to the fullest. And again, I had 9 years to say goodbye. So I go to see her occasionally. She's not too far from here. And I have all her books here and her videos. And anytime I miss my mom, I get to visit with her. And it's just a wonderful experience. And I brought a special guest here. This was my mother's ET. So, my mother had chronic pain syndrome. So she always liked to touch people like ET. So whenever I get lonely, I just bring ET out and I feel like I have my mom's presence with me. So anyway, thank you for letting me share today. And it's a pleasure to be with all of you. And thank you for honoring Elisabeth.
Thank you, Ken. It's clearly a lot of joy in this reflection. As your mother is the namesake for today's event, is there anything that you'd like to say about the session today?
It's wonderful being here with all of you. And again, it just reminds me how she's so much with us, and her work has a life of its own that just carries on. And so it's very special today. I remember the day she died like so well, just like it was last week. So many times she thought she was going to die, and she wasn't. She certainly wasn't suicidal, but she would say to me, "Kenneth, don't make plans on Tuesday because I'm dying on Monday." I'd say, "Mom, that's wishful thinking. I know you're ready to make your transition, but So anyway, so many times she thought she was going to die. It was a strange when she actually passed, but yeah, it was incredible being with her when she made her transition. But thank you for honoring this and remembering this.
Outstanding. Thank you very much, Ken. Our next memory storyteller is Nandita Lakshmanan.
Well, thank you, Manish. Thank you so much, Ken, for sharing your memories. And thanks, Pallium India, for organizing this. So I'm Nandita. And if you were to ask me 5 years ago what my biggest fear was, I would say it was confronting death. And that somehow changed between 2014 and 17, where I was losing people who were an integral part of my life, literally every 6 months. So it started with my divorce in 2014. And I remember when my husband moved out of our home, saying it felt like death. And then that October onwards, I began my encounter with death, as it were, one after the other. So I never thought I would have such a wide choice to pick for this tribute today. No, but I dedicate this memorial to Sharan, who nudged me to start my business, the father of our son, my financial advisor, and my friend for life, also my ex-husband. Sharan passed on April 9, 2017. And 2 weeks before, I was spending some time with him. And I asked him what he was thinking about. And he actually said, I wish for only 3 more years to see Aryaman, our son, through college. Both of us knew this wasn't to be. But there was a certain wistfulness and an acceptance in Sharan's voice when he said that. It was the only thing he wanted to live for. And one of the big reasons why I chose Sharan today was shortly after this call, Aryaman, our son, sets foot into college today at 10:30 p.m. virtually. And so today is Sharan's day as much as it's Aryaman's. So a little bit about Sharan. For anyone who knew him, he was larger than life. He could walk into a room not knowing a soul, end up inviting everybody home for a drink that evening. Now that is everyone's memory. But the one that I hold close to my heart is a side of him that was full of wisdom, quiet detachment, and a deep belief in how businesses should be run. So when I look back on the days he came to office for the audit meetings, well-dressed, punctual, scrutinizing every row in the financial statements, asking tough questions, making notes, following up, I realized he was actually scripting a legacy for our firm to follow even when he was gone. The rigor, the discipline, the toughness that comes from taking one's role seriously and wishing nothing but the best for the other. It continued till the very end. And when I say the very end, I mean, until a couple of days before he passed. He was really my friend, my advisor. He was my worst critic. And he was my best advocate when it came to my work. And as we progressed, I realized, without knowing, I had imbibed an invaluable lesson of accepting, respecting, and valuing wealth. Never to think too much about it, and never to disregard and dismiss it, as I did in my early years. In the years since our divorce in 2014 till he passed in 2017, 3 things kept us connected: our son, our work, and a deep kinship. As Aryaman goes to college today, I also want to share that those memories of Sharan's actions and words during the audit meetings and our conversations continue to leave us with strength, security, and a boundless legacy that lives on not just in our firm, but we also kind of take it out to other businesses as well. Sharan's way of conducting business has been absorbed in the books of our firm, I always say, and they speak to me should anything need to be appreciated or scrutinized. I hear it when I discuss work with Aryaman, our son, the same wisdom, the same gentle rebukes, the same complaint that I get emotional and sentimental in my decisions. I've always felt this, but to speak it out is altogether different. Today, as we go through ups and downs in business, which is the norm, my heart really swells with happiness and gratitude to have had Sharan by my side as he held my hand and walked the path with me through hot coals, green pastures, and the road less trodden. Thank you so much, Sharan. Thanks, Manish. Thanks, everyone, for listening.
That's beautiful, Nandathan. Thank you. And congratulations to your son. There's a beautiful connection across generations and legacy in all of this gratitude. I'm going to keep the agenda moving forward, and I'd like to invite our next speaker, Pranam Basu. You're muted, Pranam, please.
Heartfelt thanks to the organizers for inviting me to share my story. I, Pranab Basu, retired assistant headmaster, now at present volunteer of Eastern India Palliative Care, Kolkata, express gratitude to EIPC and Pallium India for my present existence. I lost my beloved wife, whom the memorial is dedicated to as a tribute from the core of my heart. I will speak today of the sweet memories which I think often. Our love has never cooled, the source of sweet memories of our conjugal life. We were fond of touring to the hill stations, seaside, forests, to enjoy the delightful moments in the lap of nature, arousing aesthetic feelings. We two only were out of room, ignoring the chill outside. The others who accompanied us lay under the blanket. We enjoyed illuminated, snow-capped Kedarnath peaks with the moon in the sky. Second, the reflection of moonlight glistening the water of Somorili Lake in Ladakh. We were touring in Ladakh also. Here, we two only means a lot to me, pacifying my grief. She was fond of reading storybooks and listening to her favorite songs, even during her treatment. Sometimes we had a discussion on the theme of the story, and it is my pleasure to remember that we are on the same wavelength. Sometimes I just remember, sometimes in the 1990s, one day we two decided to get drenched with the first shower of the monsoon, and we were drenched on the roof of our house. What a thrilling and charming experience we had. Now I can reminisce this one. But while reminiscing, it is sometimes emotional, but it pacifies the grief. When our daughter, now she is in Chennai, took bath, the delightful face of my wife, the memory still haunts me. Now, though I miss her physical presence, I say, wherever you are, you stay well.
Gosh. Pranav, thank you. I think I'm not alone in feeling something behind my eyes welling up as we listen to the story of you getting drenched in the monsoon with your wife. You truly kept her alive this morning or this evening for you folks. Thank you. I'd like to invite
Okay.
I'd like to invite our next speaker, Samara Mahindra. Please, if you could share with us a memory.
Thank you so much for having me here. I want to also thank Smriti for giving me this opportunity. So I thought about this a lot, and you know, there is one woman who has more or less changed my life, and very similar to Nandita. You know, I was the type of person that my biggest fear was losing a very close person to me, or death, actually, and facing death. So in about 2004, you know, unfortunately, my mother was diagnosed with cancer, and at that time, you know, I didn't even know what the word meant. Many years later, you know, she fought it for a while, and I lived beside her as a caregiver. And those years were the most beautiful years of my life. This woman, unfortunately, I had lost my father when I was 3 years old. So I grew up, you know, idolizing this one woman who, you know, called the shots, ran the home, and basically, you know, looked after 4 children by herself. From nothing, she built more or less an empire in South India when it came to her business. And I lived beside her, and she was a woman who would go, you know, for chemotherapy and then wear a bandana and go to work the next day. And that's the kind of woman that I saw every day. She taught me every single one of those days for 6 years how to stand on my own 2 feet, how to face the world, how to live my dreams and be the best version of myself. She taught me how to, you know, not live in norm and convention, and to, you know, live the way I truly believe to be right. And unfortunately, exactly in September 6, 2010, which would mark 10 years to this year, we lost her. But from there, I, you know, a couple of years later, went into the work that I do today, and which is serving people in oncology and in cancer. And I work with multiple cancer patients, and that's a memory and legacy that I'm living of my mother. When I was asked what story to share, there are multiple stories of her that I can share. But I very, you know, spontaneously thought that I would share something that very interestingly happened to me just today. When my mother passed away about a year or 2 years later, you know, I went through her things, and we all were going through her things, and I found this, you know, her diary, and she wrote to all of us everything that she wanted to say, everything she wanted to communicate. She wrote it so beautifully in that diary, and she wrote about how she felt every day and what the emotions that she was going through. And at the end of the diary, you know, she wrote a segment to me, and she said, you know, my biggest sadness is that I will probably not see you get married and see you, you know, live a beautiful life with someone else. And of course, that was something that, you know, was sad, and I know it was very important thing for her. But very surprisingly, you know, I have a lovely person in my life who actually proposed to me today. And what actually happened was, I suddenly realized that today is also my mother and father's wedding anniversary. So I think life has come full circle, and I thought that's a beautiful memory that I want to share, because I know she has her blessings on me, and she is a woman that will remain with me, inside of me for the rest of my life. And I just am really fortunate and thankful that I have been given this chance today, out of all the days, to be in front of all of you all, and yeah, and share this tribute to her. Her name is Betty Mahindra, and she is just right here with me.
Samara, I hope you were able, congratulations.
Thank you.
I hope you were able to see the uniform smile that went across everybody's screen on the Zoom call. Right away, we just saw 100 sets of teeth. just pop up on the screen. That's amazing. Congratulations. And thank you so much for sharing that beautiful reflection. In preparing this session, as you so beautifully described, for many of us, the first guru, the first teacher, the first love attachment is that sacred connection we hold with our mothers. And I thought it'd be nice to take a moment to look at a painting from our art museum where I teach at Dartmouth College. And if we just look at this painting, if we collect the facts at face value, we see a figure of a woman at the end of what appears to be a long hallway. She's obscuring the vanishing point with her body. The colors are cold. She's alone, isolated, perhaps disconnected, and looking back at the viewer. We can bring our own biases to this too. Here's from the science perspective, here's a two-dimensional representation of a 3D world. Or from a religious perspective, this is a yantra of a woman as the central deity. But in the interest of time, allow me to reveal a little bit of history. This is a painting from 1966 from an artist named George Tooker, and the painting is called Farewell. This was painted after his mother passed away at our university hospital. The vanishing point contained in the image is a function of the derivation of the equation for affinity. And a popular interpretation of this is that the painting calls attention to the cold isolation of the ICU, the solitary and sterile death resulting from the modern biomedical model. It's a stark image that this man used to grieve the loss of his mother and perhaps to communicate how alone she was and how alone he now is. However, there's another interpretation that's given us a point of departure to understand this rite of passage. There's this late anthropologist, Arnold von Yenop. He was in the 1950s, and he describes every rite of passage having three stages. There's a separation. There's an in-between stage of figuring stuff out, and then there's a reintegration. Every rite of passage has that. Death is no different. And this image of death could be seen as a mother. And if you look closely at the image, and you can find it online, if you look closely, the mother's looking back at the viewer. It's almost as if she's looking back at the child, walking towards the infinite, saying, yes, I'm infinite. I go on forever. Our relationship will go on forever. It's just changing. With this rite of death, we separate, we grieve, but we're reintegrating. And I live in your memories. Keep me alive with your words. I think that's what we're doing here today, and that's why I invoke this painting. And with that, I'd like to invite our next speaker to continue doing just that. So our next speaker is Shantanu Chakraborty. Shantanu, can you please share a tale with us?
Yeah, I would like to thank first to Pallium India for giving me the chance to tell my story. And Ruma, I would like to talk about Ruma. We have a hospice named Ruma Abadana Hospice. Ruma was my wife. And the story begins, in 1988, I would say, when I formed a musical group named Melody. And Ruma was the lead singer of that group. And we used to travel several places in West Bengal, and later in south part of India, we did some concert with the group. Anyway, while running the group, after a few years, Ruma's dad, started searching for a suitable person for her, for her marriage. And I was very much involved with, searching, collecting information, from the possible persons, who they choose, because I was the most trusted person in the family. In many cases, we felt that all those, there are a number of, guys we choose, they were perfectly fine. And each time, Ruma said, she cancelled sometimes for some silly reasons like that. It's not much hair, it's too fat, too thin, all the silly things were there. So, we were tired, how much we will, how long we will find. So one day I asked her that, can you tell me, Ruma, exactly what kind of person you want? And she said, exactly like you. Now I was very much surprised. I told that story to my mom, and actually Ruma was one of the favorite girl in our group to my mom. She suddenly, said that she want to, negotiate with their family. And in those days, somebody from boys' side never goes first to a girl's place, for any proposal. But mom did that. She hardly, gave them any choice apart from, agreeing with her proposal. Within 1 month, we got engaged. Within 6 months, we got married. So it was very much sudden, all of a sudden. My age was only 24 years at that time. Anyway, we became more involved with music, as music was my profession. I used to play mainly tabla and other Indian drums. I used to play in different parts of India and for All India Radio. I used to compose background music for teleseries, and she was, with me, we together performed in a different television program. It was very funny for, to satisfy Ruma with my any live performances, nearly everybody, when the audience, maybe they are clapping, they are very much happy with my performance, he will come back at home and will criticize all some minor things. But actually those things helped me to improve more. In 99, Ruma became pregnant. And then we found that she had a growth on her abdomen. After several findings for 3 months, we went for operation, and baby had to terminate. The operation was unsuccessful, and Ruma became terminally ill. And all of a sudden, our life changed. We were very well known to the society. We were popular, but now we can see everybody is avoiding us. Ruma started feeling insecure. I don't know. I was not sure at those days, why she was feeling insecure, but I had to leave my musical career. One incident I can clearly remember. I was playing a background score in a live theater, and suddenly I got a phone call from Ruma. I only used to receive call from her due to her illness, and it was a very fun comedy theater. And she was crying and asking me to come back quickly. So I actually, I was helpless. I was in tears, but I can hear the sound of roaring laughter in the audience. So that was my last performance, before Ruma's death. And she eventually died on 28 October 2002. I went to Australia then 2001, I went to Australia for having some course in palliative care, and 2002, I founded Ruma Vadana Hospice. So that's the way Ruma Vadana Hospice started. And now we are about to start a 25-bedded, inpatient hospice in Chandanagar. Everything set up, just, for some COVID issues, we are waiting. And also we got a grant from Ruma Vadana Australia. They are the main fundraiser of us. And so we will have another 40-bedded hospice near to our present setup, and the work is in progress. So that's the way Ruma is going on. That's it.
Thank you very much, Shantanu. A beautiful reflection with smile, grief, learning. It's all here. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to jump across the pond now and go from India to South Africa to our dear friend and soulful comrade, Joan Marston.
Thank you so much, Manish, and thank you, Pallium India. It's wonderful to be back with you. And Smriti, when you invited me to speak about the children that I care for, and I'll tell you more about that in a minute, I had this vision of all these beautiful little children in front of me, and I thought, who am I going to speak about? And for those who don't know me, I work in the field of children's hospice and palliative care and have done for around 3 decades. So there are a lot of children. But I think the one who made the greatest impact and who's the reason I'm really in this field is a little boy who was called Tabu Matwabeng. Tabu was born in a place called Matwabeng, which is why he has that surname, but he was abandoned at birth. And we know nothing about his family except that his mother must have had AIDS, because very early on he showed symptoms of HIV and AIDS. And the hospital that took him in when he was this tiny little newborn called him Tabu. And in South Sutu, that means joy or happiness. And I thought that was a wonderful gift that they gave to him. And he came into my life and into our hospice's life when he was around 4 years old. He'd been really sick. He was skin and bone. He'd had tuberculosis. We had no antiretrovirals. And they said, send him to hospice, to the daycare and home program. And I'll never forget seeing this little boy for the first time. He had a smile that lit up the room. He had these great, big, soulful eyes, and he had an energy within him. Even when he was the most frail, he had this internal energy. He lived life to the full. And let me tell you, many times we sat next to his deathbed, and then Tabu would revert, and next minute we get the big smile, and we get the mischief, and we get the, I want this to eat. So he kept us, he was totally in control. He even got to the stage where he went to school, but he actually was very bad at learning. I think inside him he knew that he didn't have to learn because he wasn't going to live long enough to do that. But boy, was he good at life. He knew how to live every moment to the full. And he was my teacher. He taught me what children need, children who've got incurable conditions. A child like him who was brought up in a children's home, who spent time in hospital and at the end in the hospice that we built because of him, Sunflower House. He taught us that every child needs caring adults. He didn't have a biological family he could relate to, but I became his mother and my husband became his father. He adopted grandparents. He even adopted a big brother, and everyone else was auntie and uncle. So we learned that every child needs to belong. He taught us how to communicate through play, through interest in everything, through asking questions. We followed him around. He kept us really under his thumb. He was totally in control. And even when he was dying, he had me running backwards and forwards to the shop to buy this that he wanted to eat, to go and get him that toy. So he was absolutely my teacher. And whenever I look at Sunflower House, which is really his legacy, and I talk about it as Tabu's treasure, I see this beautiful little boy who taught me so much about love, unconditional love, and that you don't have to be biologically attached to a child. And what he also taught me about is that when you have a hospice for children, you never have patients. You have a child. You have a child with all the needs of every other child. And the African proverb, where every child is my child, that was Tabu's legacy to me. And that's what I always hold in my heart.
Thank you so much, Joan. Grief is the teacher. We just think about this. We're hearing about adopted grandchild. We're hearing about ex-husband, wife, mother. We're learning from all of these different spaces, and each one of these suffuses our heart with a lot of enthusiasm and deep care. Thank you so much, Joan. I'd like to continue traveling across the world now and head over from South Africa to Seattle. West Coast. Michael, please.
Thank you, Manish. It's an honor to be here. My name is Michael Hebb, and I'm the founder of Death Over Dinner and EOL, which just launched, which I'll mention in a moment. But August 24th is a very significant day to me. It's a day when my life changed completely, and Ken Ross and Elisabeth Kübler-Ross had a significant part in that. We chose August 24th 7 years ago to launch Death Over Dinner. And this Death Over Dinner, for those that you don't know, is a movable feast. People have been hosting dinners all over the world for the last 7 years to talk about their end-of-life wishes, to confront their mortality. And on August 24th, 7 years ago, in honor of Elisabeth's death, or the day that she started dancing into the galaxy, there were 500 dinners on a single night in 20 countries. And we owe that to Ken and to Diane Gray and to Elisabeth, because people did know her and love her in Croatia, in Japan, in India. And the pictures that came back and the stories 7 years ago of these people gathering and connecting over death, which really, I think, is summed up best by my co-founder, Angel Grant, when she says, we created these dinners to reduce the distance between us, to decrease the distance between us. And that's what I know death and this conversation and grief to do if we open to love. And Elisabeth liked to talk about the fact that there are two responses to life. There's fear and there's love. There's contraction and there's expansion. And definitely when it comes to grief, when it comes to loss, we have a choice. We can contract in fear, or we can open in love. And when we open in love, our life just becomes so much more extraordinary. So I do want to honor someone today. And that's my father. And I was 13 years old, and it was Halloween, which is quite an auspicious day. And I woke up at 3:43 a.m. in the morning. I didn't know why I was awake. I looked at the clock, went down the hall, and I ended up going back to sleep because there was nothing that had clearly made any noise or no disturbance in the neighborhood. And I woke up that morning. It was a little bit later than usual. No one had come to wake me for school, and I just knew. I knew that my father had died. And it turns out that he took his last breath right about at 3:43 a.m. And again, I was a 13-year-old, and there wasn't much for me to do with myself on that particular day. My family didn't quite know how to deal with grief, and so I went to school. And I remember being at school and being among my friends and making a decision to not tell anybody. And I went out that night. It was Halloween. You go out and you do terrible things when you're 13. You cause trouble. And being out in those streets in this very surreal, cinematic scene of watching young teenagers in costumes and feeling everything I was feeling. And I still made this decision to not tell anyone. And the reason why was very, very clear as I look back on it. There was no one who I thought could actually hold the weight. I looked around me to the people in my life, and I didn't think that I could tell them about what I had just experienced and have them nurture it and meet me with it. I have a very strong sense that they might drop it. It's a very scary thing to share grief and have it be dropped. You're very fragile at that moment. So I think I made a very wise decision to hold on to it. And the thing that happened, and this is another thing that reminds me of Elisabeth, she liked to say, or wrote once, for me, death is a graduation. This idea of it not being an ending, but being a beginning of something possibly even greater. And here I was, 13, looking at my friends, and there was this distance that grew between us. There was a separation between me and my peers that happened at that moment because I couldn't share my grief. And in that distance actually grew something really beautiful. I started to ask really big questions. It's how I became interested in Eastern mysticism in general. It's really what led me to the Buddha, and large spiritual questions. And it's where, in that kind of gap, is where I built a life that was based upon meaning and purpose. And my father really gave me that gift. In the same way that Elisabeth has given Ken so much and given the rest of us so much, my father truly gave me that gift of being able to live a life of meaning, of significance, of presence. And to him, I'd like to honor these two great humans in my life. And thank you for having us.
Thank you so much, Michael. You're bringing together a lot of threads here as we wind down. The grief, the weight and the heaviness, death being a graduation, a rite of passage, and reintegrating in the world after death, and celebrating your father on this day. Thank you. Well, let's go from Seattle and come back to India. Amitabh, can you bring us home?
Sure. Hi. Thank you, Pallium, for letting me be part of this wonderful gathering. My name is Amitabh, and I'm here today to talk about my mother, Sheila, and of her experience, our shared experience with her death. Here's a photo of her that I'm sure she'd be happy for all of you to see, and you can leave it up there. And I'm not unhappy to come in last because although my mother has passed away almost 7 years ago now, when it comes to the Kübler-Ross model, I'm still struggling with that first stage of grief, denial, which is pretty much as far as we Punjabis get when it comes to mortality or anything else that involves, talking about or embracing our feelings. My mother's gone, and as a family, we really find it difficult to talk about her. We're certainly not talking about the circumstances of her passing, which was from ALS, which is also known as Lou Gehrig's disease or MND, or, this must be some form of divine punishment for my deeds on earth, because it is a horrible way to go. And I think perhaps we're paralyzed by that question because we can't understand what she did to deserve to suffer the way that she did. The sanguine answer to that, and the one that she would have chosen, is that we are all at some time, given about as much suffering as we can tolerate. And then somewhere along the way, we let go or we are afforded release. And that's generally how it is for most end-of-life situations. But it's hard to be sanguine about a prolonged critical illness and seeing someone you love in that much pain. And that, I believe, is where palliative care comes in, to help you live through those difficult times. My mother was a doctor and a seeker, and she was studying to become a psychotherapist. Partly, I suspect, to help her out, with the silences in my family. And she loved to talk. My friends could speak to her about anything, that they often reported back to me that, she'd call them to ask weird questions that she might have had trouble asking me. And then ALS took away her ability to speak. And rather than despair and continue to flail around like we were at that time, she did a very interesting thing. She left. Without any real discussion on the subject, and she knew it was morally and literally impossible for us to argue with her at this point when she was unable to talk. She recused herself to our ancestral home in the nearby city of Pune. And this was a place where we had spent, wonderful days with ease and in communion, but also where we had returned regularly of late to watch each of my grandparents die in succession from cancer, emphysema, and heart disease. And so, we wondered what she was thinking. Did she foresee the guilt we were going to be left with? Did she not see the obvious and terrible, Mukti Bhavan dramatism behind her decision? The truth is, she was thinking, and she did leave, she did run away, she planned it all, and it worked out exactly the way she wanted. Although we went up there as often as we could, and she was never without any of us, it wasn't anywhere near how it had been day in and day out. And removing this space from our day-to-day situation, this space of us being with her in Pune, allowed us to focus on our togetherness. My mother's disease process became less of a terrifying challenge and went back to being a journey we were bound on together. We traveled up there regularly, dutifully, and expectantly, and got to worry about the value of now, as opposed to sinking into some kind of depression and chasing some unavailable cure, which didn't exist, and which I see every ALS family I work with these days fixating upon, spinning their wheels until they've spent all their time, money, and optimism on some future that isn't there yet. And I certainly hope it comes soon in the form of a cure. And having used up all the opportunities that they had to focus on that almost inappropriate term, which is applied to these situations, the quality of life. So I mentioned morality to these families I work with, and they have the same bristling response that I originally had, because it seems insensitive and premature. It feels like giving up. It isn't time enough yet for anyone to let go of their loved ones. But if we thought about that, about cutting our engines and coasting, flowing, using the psychotherapy term, before my mother decided to do it for herself, we might have gone on that family cruise together while she could still walk. We could have ensured every meal featured her favorites while she could still eat. We would have talked about her feelings long before it was impossible to have anything but a labored and precious effort spelt out a letter at a time on an alphabet board when she couldn't speak anymore. And still, I believe we were very fortunate, because the grace came in my mother's decision to take back control of her last days. I remember how she rejected all the high-tech tools I kept bringing to her, from this US university or that. And she would make us spell out words on a Ouija board that she had our young children draw out with color pens. How she deputed each one of us to a separate onerous task of her daily care and wouldn't allow for any scope creep. Everyone had to do their deputed task. She had us gather and sing her Goodnight Irene, as a group, as a choir every night. And it was beautiful. If you can imagine ALS as the worst imaginable form of lockdown, being locked into your own body as your mind remains free, the way out is, for her, is exactly as it is for all of us now. It's through the imagination. And my mother used all of her imagination to bring, dignity back into her life and grace into ours. We learned that palliative care, through her, we learned that palliative care it's not terminal intervention, it's not giving up, and it certainly isn't dying. It's using all your remaining and available resources to live and love and hopefully heal, even if it is in the Punjabi way. I was back in Pune this weekend. Sorry, lockdown police, and I found another photo from my mom's time in her Pune paradise. And so I'm just going to flash that now. And I believe Dr. Ross would have enjoyed watching her go with the flow and having had the opportunity to say goodbye in the way that she wanted. So let me just try that.
As you're pulling that up, Amitabh, it strikes me that there's a beautiful symmetry here. Wow. There's a beautiful symmetry here that we started talking about a great mother and we're ending talking about a great mother. And we've traveled quite a distance in the last hour. So thank you very much. And thank you to all of our speakers today, and particularly a deep gratitude to all the people who've transcended physical form that we've kept alive today. You know, the grief of your loss results in the joy and the memory of our collective learning. As we close this session, we ask everybody here to continue what's been modeled for us today. To think about someone who's died that you'd like to keep alive. Tell their story and how it connects to yours. Tell it often. Keep them alive. And now let's start that tradition and give the gift of being a part of their life by letting us as a community read their names. So maybe as we round out this hour, please type the names of the people who you love, who have passed. Let us see their names. There's a power in the name itself. I mean, ultimately, in the end, I think we're only here on earth for a brief moment. And my sense is that brief moments for joy, the joy of learning and connection. So thank you very much, and we look forward to reading these names. And please stay as long as you'd like. I think we can stay on for a bit and just enjoy some of this time together. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Manish.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you everybody for coming. And thank you to all our speakers for some absolutely beautiful stories, and everyone who's been named today. It's not easy to take the names of people we've lost and loved. So today was a memoriam to all of them and to the ones who were not named even. And thank you for participating. And be well, go well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.